Well, welcome to today's webinar, Augmenting Resilience, a Timely and Practical Perspective. We'll be featuring an interview and brief presentation from Bogdan Motok. This topic is particularly timely in many respects. I mean, we've been talking about some of the forces and sources of change and the socio-demographic, technological, economic, and governing factors that are sort of reshaping our world today. And the impact is particularly troubling, for me anyway, among youth. It seems to me we're in a world where risk has taken on such a level of significance, not physical risk. We talked about resilience and making your way through the forest or hunting in strange lands. We talked about physical resistance. And yet today we seem to be talking more about social and psychological resistance of resilience, of people unable to handle well, it used to be sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, that was of the past. Today, we really seem to have kids that understand what a victim is and seem to be fragile, if you will, rising mental illness. So I've invited Bogdan to tell us a little bit about his life experience and the exposure which he intentionally or unintentionally has been subjected to, and what's led him to believe and to understand the concepts of resilience and their relevance today. So without any further ado, Bogdan from Campbell River, British Columbia today, you're on.
Hi, everybody, and thank you. This talk is anchored in two bodies of knowledge that I've gathered. One is the research for the book that I've published in 2022. The title is How to Augment Your Mind's Immunity. And the second influx of information is related to a relatively new concept that has, as my daughter said, an ugly name, and that's the notion of stigmergy. I'm an engineer, so I'm used to take theory and implement it, make actual things that move around and so on and so on. So we are going to talk about minds and fear and values and the collective unconscious and archetypes. And so they all seem abstract. They're actually all with a deep practical root. Otherwise, this shows two patterns, one in AI-based control systems, the other one in cancer detection. A diagram that I still love, which is behind a startup that could have been the Canadian Google. So it's background of the psychological profile of users, and then customization of their experience based on their specific personality profiling. The medal that shows to the right, it reminds me of a funny moment. I was still a refugee. I was traveling with a brown passport, which is the no citizenship passport. But I've done an installation for a Canadian company in a Canadian pavilion. So that's a medal that I received from the Canadian government for representing Canadian technology abroad. The book, it's split in 2 volumes. It's heavy, so heavy to carry around. It has 950 pages and 400 and something illustrations, but squeezed to one slide. It's giving you 3 major messages. One is do your best to understand yourself, understand your values, understand what makes you do the things you do when you feel yourself. The second is embrace who you are. Who you are, it's no high mark. It's not that you have to be the champion at speed running or the fastest climber or the fastest swimmer. You have your own values that are very relevant to the environment you live in, and they have to be respected. You should respect them. And the third point is that these values are relevant at multiple levels. It's not only about you, but when you form the smallest cooperative group, I hope, your family, your values modulate the values of your family. When you start or join a team, your values modulate, contribute to the values of the team and reflect in them. And in each of these instances, the more authentic you stay, the more coherent your contribution to that cooperative effort. Presentation payload. As Perry has looked into in the previous webinars, and so we are going through a complex set of things that are very likely to be non-linear. So there are challenges at international level, at national level, and at the individual level. And they reflect in concern all the way into anxiety and depression, where anxiety flags, as well as depression, they both flag the fact that you experience things or situations for which you are not prepared. You do not have the know-how. You've never handled before that kind of pattern. This complexity, at least in my mind, seems to have one common, actually, root cause. And the root cause can be addressed through this capacity to live an authentic life. So the roadmap, we're going to look at life and living at the individual level. So we would touch quickly life, minds, and authenticity, and then move into the socioeconomic well-being, where we find that strange word, concept, stigmergy, and then pathologies and immunity in the socioeconomic context. Life and living, the simplest model for living that I've encountered in my research is offered by two researchers, Chilean originally, and it's called autopoiesis, the autopoietic model. Autopoiesis defines as living anything that it's capable to self-maintain and self-reproduce, and it's self-referential, which means that at the moment of the initiation of life, all the knowledge is contained in the elements that form the living. Varela and Maturana were biologists and very in love with cybernetics. Their definition was initially targeting biological life, but has been quickly captured and moved into cognition and into social and so on. Niklas Luhmann, the German social scientist, applied it relatively quickly to organizations and so, and has been expanded after that. In autopoiesis, the functions that provide this autopoietic capability can be clustered in two groups. One group is the intrinsic autopoiesis. These are the functions that keep the living entity alive. So for example, for us, it's the continuous renewal of cells in the various organs that make our organism, the distribution of energy and the removal of metabolic results and so on. So everything that keeps you healthy, so to speak, would be included in the intrinsic autopoiesis. On the structural coupling side, we have the functions that embed the living entity in its context. So for example, again, probably anthropomorphic examples are easier to follow. Going to work, earning your income, going and getting food, and so these are all issues of structural coupling. Just to relate to what I was mentioning before, knowing your authentic self and living your life in authenticity implies discovering where can you best deliver your value in your context. So having a healthy structural coupling component. As such, living is persistence of the autopoietic identity in time. And I've listed some of the academics with the recognition that are behind that kind of constriction of the definition of life. Purpose of life, although it is frequently said that there is no purpose, I came to disagree with that. It's the passing forward of the autopoietic knowledge. So even if we consider having children, so passing your genetic knowledge to your children with the various additions or changes that the process has, but doing your work, sharing your experiences, be the experiences successful or negative, all these activities take the experience that you gained in your life and move that experience forward in generations. So purpose of life is this passing forward of survival knowledge. Purpose in life for each of us was stated for thousands of years now, and it's know thyself, the Socratic statement, know yourself and be your own best. Because of its generality, I've defined a term, and this term is lifeoid. It's inspired by organoids. So, and it represents any entity that persists in time with an autopoietic pattern. And through this clustering of entities, families, friends, communities, like even this community that Perry is building, nations, organizations, species, biomes, they're all lifeoids. And being in this class, having them in this class allows you to extrapolate minding functions and pathologies from the individual to the community or through to other classes that are homeomorphic. So they preserve the properties, they preserve the relations in the topology of their model. Minds and minding. Mind is again the organoid that does the management of knowledge. And the phylogeny of minding, if we take this definition, it takes you all the way down in history or back in history to protocellular life, to clouds, chemical clouds that self-maintain, that have that autopoietic property. So through this perspective, cells, colonies of cells, insects, name them, plants, any form of life that is autopoietic has a mind and has the typical functions of the mind, which has been called minding by some of the specialists in the field. The phylogenetic perspective is extremely helpful. I've used here to the upper right. This is a bacteria colony and a special type of marker that shows the growth. But the intent, the message in that picture is this inheritance with innovation, that it's specific to the phylogeny of biological life. Every single species in the phylogenetic tree transfers its body of survival knowledge to the next species that improves it, modulates it, subtracts some and so in order to become best adapted to the context of the moment. But knowledge that was inherited, it's still there, it's still in one's mind, and it's still active. Again, when I'm saying mind, I don't refer to the brain only or to the neural processes. Mind and body are difficult to separate, as every command that comes through the neural pathways or through the hormonal pathways trigger activities in what we usually call body, in muscles or in other organs, that become feedback to the neural platform. And so the boundary between body and mind, it's difficult to define. I was lucky to have worked early on with artificial neural networks. And the luck comes from the fact that they are simple to understand, although surprisingly intelligent, even when they're simple. I've pictured here the typical layout of an artificial neural network just to convey their simplicity. But in my practice, I've built expert systems to debug $25 million worth of installation that was designed by me. The expert system had a 500 neuron brain that exceeded, in most cases, my capabilities to diagnose and correctly point to the problem in the system. So the power of coherent information for even small minds, it's amazing. While noise in multi-billion cells minds is significantly detrimental. From a modeling perspective, I've used Jung's model with some encouragement from Marvin Minsky's perspective. And at the bottom here, I have a sketch showing the stack, Carl Gustav Jung's stack, that has at the very deep edge collective unconscious, followed by personal unconscious, followed by character, which is the behavioral identity of our authentic selves. Ego, which is the psychological entity that we usually think we are. So when you wake up in the morning and see yourself in the mirror and eventually say, hi, you're talking to your ego. And personality is the adaptive layer of your ego to your social context. And the personality can have multiple personas, which are specific type of front ends, of facades that we develop. Like, for example, when you talk in a meeting, you're taking one persona. When you're talking to your family or friends, you're having another persona. When you're driving, you're having another persona. Authenticity, as I said, it's the behavioral signature of your character. It's usually sitting behind your personality, behind your personas, and it's for most of us non-trivial to identify. There are nowadays multiple tools to help you identify your authenticity, seen as this behavioral signature. Myers-Briggs, MBTI, it's usually marked. FFM, or five-factor model. These are two methodologies. They place you in a space that it's usually 5-dimensional or so. So when you take such a test, you get coordinates that give your location in that space. Artificial intelligence is highly suited for this kind of classification, and the economies that usually have made public the use of profiling and so are usually online dating services. For example, eHarmony, one of the more popular and more successful dating sites. Successful means it puts together people that actually enjoy being together for longer periods of time. eHarmony places your coordinates in a space that has 75 dimensions. And the famous Cambridge Analytica, the one that's connected to the 2016 surprising outcomes, is, although they never declared that, but through the back doors, it's using classification tools with nearly 178 dimensions. There are tools. The message here is that there are tools, and you can find yourself in a complicated space, but that once you start looking at ends being familiar. I wanted to mention here two things. One is that the unconscious mind is extremely complicated, and life selects efficient living, efficient survival, and so life selects for survival with the lowest amount of energy consumption. As such, as you work in that stack, the Jung stack, the number of dimensions of the mind are reduced more and more. Ultimately, our ego and our personality usually handles convenient, comfortable 3 or 4 dimensions. Yeah, these are the 3 physical dimensions plus time. When we try to understand archetypes and patterns of behavior that are anchored in the deeper layers of our minds, with our ego or our personality, with our conscious mind, we do have a challenge of dimensionality mismatch. It is difficult, and we have to use metaphors, and the equivalences are fuzzy. And the second mention that I had here is simplifying the layering of the mind to three components. We would have a rational component. This is the Paul MacLean model of the triune mind. We have a rational component, an emotional component, and an instinctive component. Under stress, when our knowledge in the rational layer fails to serve us, we roll back into the emotional component, which is called paleomammalian, and it's specific to mammalian type of behavior. And when emotional behavior fails to respond to the stressor, we roll down further in the so-called reptilian complex in instincts. This is when you basically are aggressive, you rage, you're driven by rage, and you hate anything that seems to be different from you.
Let me interrupt here, Bogdan, because you're onto something that may have predictive value, and I've been fascinated by the elaboration and the explanation of the model that you've laid out. But when I look at this, and I think of people saying that we are living in an incredibly irrational environment, they can't make sense. Uncertainty is prevalent. They therefore fall back not from thinking through, but feeling their way through when even their feelings are failing. And they fall back on this reptilian complex or instincts where violence becomes the option. One would think in a world of increasing complexity, you would be predicting that we would ultimately see people resolving to violence to resolve the irrational.
Yes, according to Paul MacLean's model, which has relatively wide acceptance, this is the case. When the knowledge that you have fails to serve you, there is this rollback, this drive into a state in which you see enemies and you see an aggressor in anything that is different. Be that difference your color of the skin, your height, your gender, your political affiliation, your whatever criteria that allows you to differentiate becomes a criteria to fear and hate.
But there's another option besides fear and aggressing, and that is to become passive and escape.
There is always the fight or flight or freeze. Yeah. Pattern. I guess the reptilian aspect of this is specific to the situations when you are under stress and you cannot escape, or you consider that you would win. So you engage instead of.
So the building of resilience would be to enable you to remain in the rational state.
That's the solution. The solution is to identify this rollback, identify the fact that you're actually sinking down, abandoning your authenticity. You're sinking down into survival knowledge that is not specific to your species. And so identify that and lift up.
Okay, now you're 8 slides into 20, and you're a half hour into the show, so we've got to move
Yeah.
a little bit.
So stigmergy is a very interesting concept, relatively new in my research. Basically, stigmergy is it's a form of distributed governance for collaborations, for groups that collaborate. And it's based on the traces that one lives in the environment that influence the rest of the participants in the collaboration. And I have this sketch here to suggest that. A typical example that comes to mind is, for example, if you eat your fast food and throw um, the garbage on the street instead of putting it in a garbage bag, you make more likely others to be sloppy, not only with their manners of keeping order, but in everything else. So minds generalize patterns and then reflect them back. So in a dirty city, the quality of services everywhere lacks accuracy. There is a phylogenetic perspective to stigmergy also in the protocellular life. So if we go 3 billion years back, traces that form stigmergic mind are chemical. With biological life, you have biochemical markers, and the example is insect, ants, and so that leave pheromones. In socioeconomic life, traces are behavioral, as I've mentioned, and in our modern life, traces are in the machine-mediated communication, to give one of the most recent examples. Below is a sketch of coherent type of traces in the environment versus traces that lack coherency, that induce a lack of coherency in the participants in the cooperation. Socialization, what is the specific survival methodologies for our species is hyper socialization. It's Yuval Harari's term. And we've evolved to cooperate well and to share knowledge instead of growing muscles and strengthening bones and growing bigger teeth, so to speak. Our minds, presuming that our species, the Homo sapiens sapiens, it's 200,000 years old, presuming we can go 1,000,000 years old. Also, the mind was set for a very clear type, a very consistent type of living pattern in which you would cooperate to secure food and safety for the shelter, find water, heal injuries, and assist birth. And this was achieved through tribal integration. The same mind with the same biology, with the same genetic code behind the emergence, has a totally different set of challenges. And of course, this is ChatGPT digging that's putting the hierarchy: climate change, mental health, social justice, employment, and political identity as the concerns of the modern mind.
So the modern mind is struggling with socio-psychological stresses.
And again, the significance is that there was more connection, stronger ties into the knowledge that was inherited by the Homo sapiens sapiens. So the Homo sapiens sapiens survival was closer than apes, where Homo sapiens was doing better the socialization and the transfer of knowledge and so. While now we've broken away significantly from our ancestral inheritance, so to speak. Mental illness skyrocketing. You can see here the exponential curve, and this is a graphic that's prior to the pandemic. Post-pandemic, this is more aggressive. My hypothesis, which matches others, seems to be that the cause of this confusion, this lack of motivation, this difficulty in finding identity and finding motivation in life is due to a disconnect between the community mind, between the stigmergic mind and individuals. And it manifests in political manipulation, in education that doesn't adjust to its students, in economic practices that are disconnected from social needs. Daniel Schmachtenberger is a modern philosopher, extremely intelligent and self-taught, and he's flagging to a series of challenges in the modern life, in my opinion, all of them having relevance to this loss of integration, of stigmergic integration. Build immunity, find yourself, respect yourself, and live accordingly. Find your place in your context. What gives you authenticity, immunity? You realize when you're attacked. You realize when somebody is trying to manipulate you and applies the typical two-step hack and hijack. Hack by scaring you, and hijacking by using emotions to guide you in directions that are not optimal or beneficial for you. Serenity, once you know your values and you practice them, whatever you do, good or bad, whatever you cannot do, but you know the reasons why you cannot do, gives you this serenity, this comfort in where you are. And freedom, the only form of freedom that one can obtain is the freedom to be himself, whenever that's possible. Again, you're free even when you know that you would be good at something else, but for given reasons that you recognize, you cannot practice that something else at that moment. Where it's applied everywhere, as I was mentioned the notion of lifoids, you have a whole stack: individual, couple, family, community, work, and so on and so on. The same methodology. You start a company, you're the founder, you project your values in the company, and if you want that company to be strong and survive, the company needs to have an authenticity and follow that authenticity. How do you cultivate? Through the process of emergence, having a healthy emergence, which leads us in topics of early education, parenting, and schooling and mentoring. And know yourself, find your spot. This is you in the bigger network. Contribute your share and enjoy. And that was it.
That was superb. I found it particularly illuminating as you moved into the area which I could relate to a lot easier, even though with my neuroscience background and Tommy Nilsson's as well. When you got into what the ramifications are for us as a society, when we move into this highly emotional state, where we as individuals find ourselves, or others have found themselves confused without a reference point, and then falling back on, well, you got into the reptilian mind where aggression, violence, or fight or flight becomes the option, or align with some tribe that gives you some sense that you can survive or be protected by that entity. So it would seem that you're also forecasting a certain form of tribalism begins to emerge with that level of social uncertainty or disconnect.
Yes, yes. Tribalism is the identity is at the tribe level where you have the same responses and you share values. But
Yeah.
again, the degradation, the rollback, it's continuous.
So certainly one of the things that's important in your concept of autopoiesis is being able to pass on the sort of things that you've accomplished and so forth. Now we had, of course, old problem of in psychology and learning and so forth. Could animals pass on what they've learned? Can animals pass on even something like physical changes? And the critical, I guess, experiment in that was some experiment done by a man named Lamarck, Russian, I believe, who had chopped off the tails of rats, and after many, many generations, found rats were still producing tails. But these days, there have been some interesting developments with respect to that, being able to pass on things even if the genetics are not altered. What does seem to be able to be altered is the turning on and turning off mechanisms, which are hidden inside our genetics, that can alter and pass on apparently acquired conditions, conditioned and learned behaviors. So that's it.
Does that have a particular term to it, Tommy? The capacity to pass on acquired behaviors?
Epigenetics.
Yeah, apogenetics. Okay.
I would like to make a reference to the work done by Michael Levine and associates. So there is a whole group of researchers. They are actually having amazing in the mythical type of realm by manipulating the biochemical context of the emergence of embryos, in which there is such a transfer of knowledge between cells that is mediated by the environment. Although Michael Levine's work never mentions stigmergy, and probably because it is an ugly word, this is in an alignment with the understanding of stigmergy, and it allows knowledge to be transferred between parts of animals that have been segmented.
Well, wasn't this the policy of Stalin in Russia, the belief of the Lamarckian biochemistry that you could pass on these epigenetic behaviors if you would only condition the society in such a way you would have social evolution under the great Lenin, and this was the advocacy of communism. Do we have? Are you advocating? We've got
no,
some direction.
I'm not advocating communism, but it is a new line. The notion of stigmergy is extremely powerful. It's extremely powerful and relatively new. The work done by Michael Levine shows the fact that any part of the body has memory of what we normally associate with the minding function, with the function of the mind. And the other relevance that I've picked up, they have been able to stop the emergence of embryos to ancestors in the phylogenetic tree. So a salamander embryo would be stopped to a version of a reptile that predates salamanders with 50 million years or so.
Well,
And this is done through stigmergic communication. So the messages in the environment in which the cells execute the genome of the salamander, but the message of the stigmergic environment guide the evolution of the embryo.
is this still in the embryo? I mean, ontogeny reproduces phylogically. So if you
Yes, yes,
intercept the embryo in the course of its evolution, you should be able to stop it at some form
yes,
of its of evolution. Is that what he's saying? Has he done
yes,
research in
yes.
manipulating the embryo? Okay.
Yes, yes, with actual footage of the process of emergence of the embryos and so on and so on. So,
Well,
as
I mean
as yeah,
that would I mean that makes sense logically and biologically. That would make sense if given that that is not in any way contrary to the biology as we understand it. It's the behavioral dimensions that become extraordinary. That
yeah,
you can. That's where Lamarck came in and was of the belief, which is what he professed to Stalin in the Soviet Union, that you could in fact manipulate a society by modifying its behavior, and that would be passed on genetically. And Lamarck was discounted, but it may be that was premature. That there's a way to demonstrate that and achieve it in some other way. Jeff, go ahead. You've got a question, and then I'll go to
just a comment on what you were talking about in terms of Russian society and stuff. Uh, I worked with a Jewish man who was born in Ukraine and eventually moved to Israel and then to Canada, and we were talking about politics, and this was before the Ukraine war. Um, and you know, I was asking him about the history of Russia, and one of the things that he said was the Russian mentality requires a strong man to lead them. And I thought that's interesting because throughout their history, they had been invaded from all sides, from the Mongol horde, and then, of course, through communism and all this stuff. And so they had the French and the Germans, of course, in the mix. Um, and so that's how their societies survived. So I'm wondering, in terms of that Lamarckian theory, if maybe that has been inbred into their culture somehow.
Well, given the aggression of the czars and of the gulags under Stalin, it's conceivable that those survived in Russia were those that were passive.
Well, hi, Perry. Thanks. Yeah, I guess I'm interested in that juxtaposition of the breakdown of the reptilian mind. This is part of what I think I understood, and what is happening today, of course, when so many people break down into anger at the drop of a hat, which is your start of anxiety, I guess, or is that the start of the reptilian burst out? How do we? What can we tell ourselves to avoid that reptilian breakdown? If that's the emergence, I think of how do we slow down that reptile from jumping out?
This is where we get into Bogdan, your life experience in terms of what you personally have been through that enable you to build up adequate resistance to be able to handle the stresses, whether it be in a prison or in a autocratic environment.
Yes, I've seen the reptilian brain at work. So I've been a refugee in refugee camps, and I've seen violence. I've seen suicide. I've lived in that area, and I've noticed also individuals that were able to stay calm. So stay in the upper levels of the triune mind, triune brain during those events. They seem the holy ones, so to speak. I like to think that I was deeping into the emotional layers. I know I didn't stay up there with them, but knowing who you are, knowing your values, gives you stability in difficult times. Again, knowing who you are allows you to identify why don't you have the knowledge, or why don't you understand, or why aren't you able to handle a specific situation? And that gives you the mental comfort that keeps you in the upper triune level, so to speak.
Some of the extraordinary research done on survivors of those concentration camps or the death camps in World War II were indicated exactly that. And the people that maintained purpose, that they had social relationships that gave them senses of purpose, gave them the capacity to survive and move on.
It sounds I don't know what's the correct term. It sounds magic. It's not magic.
Well, time out. Just say, I'll give you a piece of magic. One of the most extraordinary inventions of mankind was the family. You want to talk about magic? You talk about your stigmergy. I mean, if family is one of your first levels of governance, and that gives you comfort. But if families are breaking down today, if a family is now 1.3 or whatever the numbers are in terms of production, and it used to be 8 and 9, you've lost a sense of family as a parenting source in a society on a massive scale.
Yes.
And now, well, you might have predicted that when the pill came along and the families became smaller, or when wealth evolves and nations have smaller families. But the erosion of the family, some say the state must displace that. And there's this woke movement that says, no, the family is now archaic, it's dying, we need a new form of governance, and that will become the state. You want to comment on that?
The pattern of building a family is with us for more than 400 million years. So in this hypothesis that I believe in which all the knowledge is embedded, so every new species wraps a modulator on top of the inherited knowledge. And so the pattern of sticking together to transfer your genome further to the new generation is 400 million years old. So the skinny layer that our species has on top is totally insufficient.
So you would agree that we've taken away a significant layer. Both parents now working. We have grandparents that live far away because we're so mobile. We as a society leave kids behind with technology entertaining them. That level of governance that helps shape the behavior and the resilience and the level of competence of that individual as they grow up is now being displaced by a teacher, or the ideology of some body that says it must be the state. And as I've shared with you before in a visit to the School of Social Work at the University of Calgary, where I was lecturing, and a professor stood up and said, the family is archaic. It will and should die. It's not functioning. It's not performing any longer.
Yeah.
We've got a problem.
This is cognitive dissonance between layers in the survival knowledge that is expected to power our life and living.
And yet we have some organizations intentionally pushing parents away, whether it be in healthcare or in education or in the welfare state. The parent is increasingly irrelevant as the agents of the state say we will be responsible. And yet what we're seeing is rising levels of mental health, homelessness, complete collapse of that civil structure that we used to rely on, and that some say is, well, that's the past, that's history, it's irrelevant today. Well, it may be irrelevant, but what are we going to do to fix it or to restore it? Or maybe we live forevermore with this level of anxiety and with the higher levels of mental illness.
Yes, the issue is aggravated by the fact that parents used to have direct examples and mentors in raising their children, while new parents now lack that example.
Right.
Part of our education should be a parenting course that you take somewhere prior to being able to be a parent.
Well, in some states that becomes mandatory. I mean, I've certainly heard it spoken to that you should be able to go, you should go to the state to get your license, and you get your license after you've taken your parenting course, and now you can drive or have babies.
Yeah.
On this upbeat moment, I'm looking for smiles. Heritage, I see you smiling there, although I think it's a grimace. Uh, but I mean, this is what these webinars are about: is to some extent expose the ridiculousness. What becomes so obvious of some of the things that seem to be going on in our world today, and yet we march on like lemmings towards some destiny, as if somehow it's going to get better. And I'm not sure how we can restore the role of parenting, or whether the state can do an adequate job with a daycare program and saying, you know, we're going to replace the family because it's not in existence anymore. So the state will mandate a daycare program at $10 a. I'm befuddled. I got to do more webinars on this topic in order to become sane again. Any recommendations, Bogdan? Any pill we can take? Any drug coming as a pharmaceutical?
I'm convinced, like I'm totally convinced that any effort put in understanding yourself better, and this is an infinite area to
we don't
study.
Our kids are told they can't even understand their gender anymore.
Yeah. That's troubling.
What level of confidence does a child have when they are being told that the seniors, the superiors, the unions, the teachers, the state will sort of work that out for you? You don't have to worry about yourself. Keep your pants on.
Yeah. As you know, we emerge as adults in of course, the first period. The emergence again has an exponential characteristic where 90% of who you are is gained in the first 7 years of life. Unfortunately, most of us as parents are not trained to facilitate that emergence at its best. We do it with love, but love is not always sufficient. One of the details that shocked me, and of course, I am a male, so shocking takes energy.
You're a male today.
Was the mismatch of personality between parent and child that actually totally hampers the ability of the parent to support the child to emerge as an authentic individual. Most of us don't know what is our specific, and how our specific personality makes us blind to the specifics of somebody else.
I read a really good article just a few days ago about China. And they're concerned about exactly the same thing that you are talking about here today, as far as the family goes. You know, now they have this decline in population, which is hard to imagine, but it is happening in China. And
well,
they're worried.
They mandated it with the one-child family. It was mandated by China.
You get the same complaints from the young people as you get here. You know, like, I don't want to raise a kid in an apartment and be stuck in an apartment all day with a kid. I have my career to go for.
Sure.
And so on and so on. So I just thought that, yeah, China is definitely, and most countries, I think, are dealing with the same issues of family.
It's interesting because China literally imposed it upon itself and is living with the unintended consequences of a society whose population is in decline. The birth rates are in decline, and it was initially mandated, but ultimately became the norm. We have in other societies which are freer, almost the same behavior, where the Catholic Church has declined, where it mandated to have children and no longer has that level of influence. And what we have is a capital state where they expect people to work, and they want to work. They want to do work because it's meaningful. It gives them a sense of purpose. But what we have lost in the consequence is the family as a governing or as a parenting entity. And I'm not sure that teachers are teachers which belong to a union and have a certain ideology of supply. One could say that they will be reliable and comforting parents. And I'm not sure the state is either. And yet the state is intervening everywhere and saying we see the problem, and we as the state will try and make some decisions which will help hopefully keep us civil and healthy, and will increase our police force at the same time and mental health. It's not going to, I don't have confidence that it's working or going to work. And so I look to technology and say, well, Bogdan, can you find me a pharmaceutical form that will give me a pill to increase my comfort level? And you'll say, yes, we'll give you a tranquilizer. And with a tranquilizer, you won't be violent and resort to your reptilian instincts. Last word, Bogdan. Last word. Go ahead.
So the optimistic perspective of this story is that artificial intelligence can provide tools that would help us better understand ourselves. So most of the tools for profiling and finding your core values are actually AI powered. And with such tools and with such knowledge, we can go deeper in understanding our minds. Again, we think and work and talk with the conscious mind. Conscious mind has a limited number of dimensions. Our unconscious mind, which is the one that defines us and has the ultimate power, is multidimensional. So to be able to mediate a dialogue and understand our knowledge that resides there, we need tools. We need tool help.
AI has a way to go in that regard, and we're all comforted by the fact that it is also in a developmental mode. But an article that appeared in Wired magazine a few weeks ago that I quoted in our last newsletter cited the significant percentage of teenagers in the United Kingdom that are relying on counseling, online counseling.
Yeah.
And that the online counseling as it's designed today is built on strengthening the individual to the point that it's excessive, and what you get is individualistic, antisocial, non-social behavior. So AI, while holding promise, has a way yet to go. Jeff, you get the semi-last word.
Thanks. It was just interesting talking about AI as being your counselor and stuff. And of course, the people who are running a lot of these AIs have no concept of how they're getting their information and this sort of thing. And I've heard of AIs that, basically operating as psychologists that have told people you should probably go kill yourself because your problems are so great and stuff like this. So I think we need to be a little bit careful, and we need to make sure that we're monitoring these things, because I mean, we're getting to the point where AI is going to be smarter than any individual person, probably close to that right now. There's no necessarily guiding morality in the machine itself. So, it might not have any motivation to keep us around.
Well, as you know, Jeff, and I think you were party to it, we did a webinar about whether or not we should be afraid and where AI is headed. I've talked to Richard Sutton on this as well, and some of us are of the view that mankind is so egocentric that he thinks that AI will give a damn about mankind and won't even be violent. It'll just ignore it, and it'll go on its own way and maybe hop in a rocket and disappear. Anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. We always like to wrap up with a bit of comedy before we go have dinner and wine. That's W-I-N-E, not whatever. Okay, Claire, this has been delightful. Bogdan, this was superb.